So, what we have for today is another announcement, a welcome one. We almost forgot about this one, right? Because a while ago, Blizzard gave us, right after the announcement of the War Within, a taste of one of the new additions of the expansion, which was going to be the hero talents. We looked at the first ones, and then Blizzard said, oh yeah, we are going to be giving out a few more over time as we get close to the release of the alpha of the expansion, and then we kind of forgot about it, because it's been months, actually, almost 2 months, actually, since we saw the first ones. So now we actually get a new batch of hero talents for 4 different classes. Starting with the one for Druid. This one is the cross between Balance and Resto. Now, players have not been particularly happy about the one for Druid, mostly because, as you might see from the initial icon of the first bit of the tree, it's gonna be something about treants. Now, balanced druids might actually be somewhat okay with these, because for them, of course, it's Force of Nature. It's not the Resto version, which is Grove Guardians. It basically makes the build around your treants even stronger for both specs. For Druid, it gives you some more AoE to your Wrath and Starfire. For Grove Guardians, it gives you even more healing. This time, some ground healing, some Dream Petals on the ground you can pick up. This is one of the better highlights of your tree. Your regrowth gives you 8% DR now, which means you can almost have basically permanent 8% damage reduction, which is quite good because Druid over time has become not a particularly tanky spec. So this is a nice help for the class as a whole. Some flat out buffs depending on your spec, longer, better celestial alignment for balance, and longer Tree of Life for Restoration Druid, although always worth mentioning, these are even more tied to particular talents. So much like for the Grove Guardians, it means you have to keep playing in your talent tree with Grove Guardians. Here, for example, you would have to keep playing with the Reforestation talent as a Resto Druid if you wanted to benefit from this talent. Decent help, particularly in Mythic Plus and particularly for Resto Druid, by doing damage. In Mythic Plus, for example, you get to have instacasts regrowths. That's a nice help for Resto, more so than Balanced Druid, in Mythic Plus especially. In the middle, you have another flat-out buff increases here and there. You have, again, some synergistic buffs for both of the specs in terms of damage for balance and healing for Resto Druid. Then you have more focus around the benefits given to you by your treants for both of the specs. What is perhaps more positive for damage in terms of Mythic Plus for Resto Druid is that your treants now cast Moonfire on nearby targets about once every 6 seconds. So now you can actually use your treants also to help you with damage, not just with healing. Useful in Mythic Plus, and will also give you passive damage in the raid as well as a Resto Druid. Even more damage to your Force of Nature and even more healing to your Grove Guardians. Same goes here. Either you want to get more regen of Astral Power or healing, or reduce cooldown for both of the treants. And the final point, Harmony of the Grove, is that now you have, again, flat out more damage and more healing for each and every one of your treants that you have active. So again, as I said, it's a polarizing set of talents since they go and buff your pets. You are now becoming, as a balanced druid with your fairies and your treants, you're now becoming basically a pet class. You are becoming a Demonology Warlock, natural version. And as a Resto Druid, you now have to lean even more into your Grove Guardians, which, as I said, might or might not be enjoyed by some of the player base. Now, for Hunter, we have the Dark Ranger, we have the Nathanos special for the cross between Beast Mastery and Marksmanship. You start out with a familiar face, a returning familiar face after several years. It's Black Arrow, although I am not a fan of the changed icon. I would rather they kept the old one, to be honest. Interesting, flavorful additions as a Dark Ranger, like for example, each time Black Arrow deals damage, you have a chance to manifest an Undead Hound to charge your target and deal shadow damage. A few other points are more based on flat damage increases for both BM and Marksmanship, or some utility effects like Disengage, having an extra slow on the enemy. You then have more effects that you can choose from. More regen with Black Arrow, or resetting the cooldown of Black Arrow, obviously the second one being much better in Mythic Plus. to make sure you reset the cooldown every time, for example, pack to pack in Trash Pulse in Mythic Plus. This one is also very good. Finally, some more defensive options for Hunter. Number 1, you get Leech for your shadow damage. This is particularly good because Beast Mastery Hunters, for example, are kind of gutted by having Leech because most of their damage comes from their pet, so they don't get much value from Leech. This one, though, gives you Leech from shadow damage dealt by you and your pets. So now it's more viable. Also, the second option is to give one of your defensives the effect of the other as well. Your heal now grants you 3 seconds of damage reduction, and your damage reduction now also heals you at 50% the effectiveness of Exhilaration. You then have some more help to your AoE by having Multi-Shot also deal AoE on a 6-second cooldown. You have the option to do 10% more shadow damage to focus a few other of your shadow damage bits like your Hounds or like your Leech from your shadow damage, or better Execute to have Kill Shot have a 15% chance to generate a charge of Aim Shot or Barb Shot. And the final point, Withering Fire, is that when it does actually happen that the ticks of damage of Black Arrow reset the cooldown of your main ability, Aim Shot or Barb Shot, you do extra shadow damage and increase your damage of you and your pet by 10%. So this is quite straightforward. It does add basically one rotational ability to your build, even though it's a long one. It's a 30-second cooldown ability, which, yeah, it can be reset, but it's not going to be a spammed ability for extra shadow damage. It gives you more defensiveness. It gives you also more AoE over time. So overall, the tools given to Dark Ranger as a hunter are not like game-breaking or revolutionary, but they do help fix a few of the issues of hunters in particular. It will be interesting to see the extra defensiveness given to hunters, how it will turn out in the next expansion. Then we have an interesting bit, a quite possibly confusing bit, but overall it seems quite straightforward when you look at the talent tree, which is the Frostfire Mastery for Fire and Frost. Very simply, doing fire damage gives you stack on Fire Mastery, and doing frost damage gives you stack on Frost Mastery. Fire gives you haste, and frost gives you mastery. They stack up by 1% up to 8 times, and they last for 12 seconds. Adding a stack does not refresh the duration, so it's like a race against time to see how many stacks you can get before the buff ends and you have to start all over. Most of the talent tree will be about giving you buffs, of course, depending on your spec. So Fire gets cooldown reduction to frost spells, while Frost gets cooldown reduction to fire spells. Cauterize resets the cooldown of all of your frost spells except for Ice Block, and Cold Snap additionally resets the cooldown of all of your fire spells. Same goes for the other set of defensiveness, like Fire and Frost, giving you the effect of the opposite barrier at 25% effectiveness, for example. The big return, of course, is in the middle, with Frostfire Bolt coming back. Frostfire Bolt in this build will be your new spammed ability, replacing Frostbolt or Firebolt, and gives you 1 stack of both Fire and Frost Mastery at the same time. You have buffs you can pick up for this ability, like increasing its damage while you're casting different kind of spells, or flat out reducing its cast time. Your Frost and Fire spells can cause Frostfire Empowerment, causing your next Frostfire Bolt to always crit, do 80% of its damage in AoE and be instant cast, and when you activate Combustion and Icy Veins, you do get this buff for free, as well as granting you maximum benefit of Frostfire Mastery, so your max stacks of Haste and Mastery, and refreshing its duration. So if you have 2 seconds left of this buff instead of 12, and you only got to 5% haste and 4% mastery, you get into Combustion, and now you have 12 seconds of 8% more haste and 8% more mastery. That's the effect given to this ability. You can go deeper down to some more flavorful effects for both frost and fire damage, like for example now Comet Storm also casts a Meteor, and then a Meteor now also casts a Comet Storm to do both types of damage. More flavorful effects, like for fire, if you reach maximum stacks of Frost Mastery by casting fire spells, your next Phoenix Flames also casts Ice Nova, or for frost, when you get maximum Frost Mastery, your next Flurry also casts Ice Nova, and when you consume the excess frost buff, the cooldown of Comet Storm is reduced. and for fire instead it's the cooldown of Meteor. So it's a very alternating type of build where you get to benefit from casting both frost and fire abilities. Obviously, most of this alternating will come from the buffs of Frostfire Bolt, counting for both, will come from Meteor, also casting Comet Storm, and vice versa, giving you both stacks of the effect, as well as actually activating your major cooldown, which will benefit you from both of these stacks. So it's not that as a fire mage you're gonna have to start going around casting Ice Nova or Cone of Cold or Ice Lance just to pop this mastery up. You'll still be a fire mage doing your fire mage stuff, just with some more flavor around frost abilities and some more frost damage to give you as much of this buff as possible. Then we end, of course, we left it for last, mostly for the drama that this will cause, because we have Priest, and the Priest is the Oracle. And just from the first icon, from the first talent, you will get an idea of what a clusterfuck this is going to be. Because Premonition replaces Power Infusion and cuts its cooldown by 1 minute. Instead of a 2-minute cooldown PI, you now have a 1-minute cooldown PI. Divine the future and gain access to a spell that gives you an advantage against your fate. If you choose Solace, you increase the healing received by 25% for 10 seconds. If you choose Insight, it's 10% more magical damage, and if you choose Glory, it's 10% physical damage. Now, this is basically, just to cut it short, since I've seen approximately 50% of the players reading this getting it wrong, this is the equivalent of Twisted Fate's W ability pick a card in League of Legends. You click the ability first, so you click Power Infusion first, and then the icon of Power Infusion will be changing every second, cycling through the different available buffs. Once you see the icon of the buff you want, you click Power Infusion again, and that's the buff you are going to be giving out with Power Infusion. That's how it works. It's not RNG, it's not random, you know what's coming, they will be cycling in the same order every time, and it's up to you to choose the buff you want. Now, in general, most of these buffs slightly favor Discipline Priest, except for one specific buff. In this case, for example, having instacast Radiance whenever you cast Premonition is of course much stronger than having instacast Prayer of Mending or Heal. Right, it's much better. You have also 10% more DR of Pain Suppression, is just straight up better than having 2 more seconds of Guardian Spirit. You have this one, Atonement, having 1 second longer duration is much better than Renew, lasting for 3 more seconds. Some cool utility, which might play some pretty important roles if you still have this heavy leaning on the usage of these spells in the game, having your dispel as a priest be 2 seconds shorter of a cooldown, so now you only have to wait 6 seconds between these spells. The other one is pretty cute. It's a pretty cute effect, although not major, but it's nice to have. But up to now, these ones mostly favor Discipline Priest. What favors Holy Priest more is this: increasing the damage absorbed by Power Shield and the healing done by Prayer of Mending by 10%. This favors Holy because Prayer of Mending heals more than Power Shield when you play Holy. Power Shield applies 1 stack of Prayer of Mending to your target, and Prayer of Mending casts Power Shield to your target at 20% effectiveness. Still slightly favors Holy, but what really favors Holy Priest is this one. When your Power Shield is fully absorbed or your Prayer of Mending heals, you gain a stack of Grand Reveal. At 150 stacks, gain an additional charge of Power Infusion, of Premonition. And that's why you can understand it's much stronger for Holy, because for Holy Priest, Prayer of Mending is going to be bouncing absolutely everywhere, dozens and then hundreds of times, whereas Power Shield for a Discipline Priest simply will not. Even just casting Salvation alone for a Holy Priest is pretty much going to give you a full charge of Premonition in about 10 seconds after casting it, for example, over the Power Shield charges of a Discipline Priest. Now, the buffs related to your new Power Infusion itself are this one. You can either increase the effect by 2 seconds or, more importantly, make the effect 30% stronger if the divine spell is different than the previous one. TLDR, if you give the 10% magical damage buff to a mage, and then 1 minute later you give the damage buff to a rogue, the physical buff instead, the physical damage will now be 13%. And after you gave it to the rogue, you give it back to the mage, because it's different, then the mage will get 13% magical damage instead of 10. So the meta will be that you have to choose 2 targets now to give this buff to instead of 1. So you can alternate the 2 types of buffs. You choose 1 magical damage dealer, 1 physical damage dealer, and you alternate the buffs to make them 30% stronger. The other buff to this talent is this one. You can either choose to reduce the cooldown of Premonition by 10 seconds, making it a 50-second cooldown ability, or you can add to the pool of possible choices 2 extra ones. Brilliance to give you back 5% of your mana, or Urgency to increase the target's haste by 12%. So now, when you click Power Infusion, you don't have 3 choices to cycle through and choose, you have 5 choices. Don't forget, if you alternate the buffs, you can make them 30% stronger. So in the case of Urgency, you wouldn't be giving out 12% haste, you would be giving out 15.6% haste. You then close with the major question mark of this hero talent 3, Clairvoyance. Premonition has a low chance to grant you Clairvoyance, which grants you, your target, and 2 nearby allies all the effects of Premonition at 100% effectiveness. Yes. When you click Power Infusion, when you click Premonition and you start cycling through the choices, you might have an extra one called Clairvoyance. So instead of seeing 5 of them, sometimes you will see a 6th one. If you choose this one, you will give your buff not to just 1 player, but to 3 players. On top of that, every single one of these buffs will be given to each and every one of these 3 players. So they will not just be getting the magical damage buff, they will also be getting the physical damage buff, the healing received, the haste, and the mana regen, all at once. And don't forget, everything we have been talking about still works with Twins of the Sun Priestess. So all of this will still be copied to the priest, just like Power Infusion is now. So this buff would basically be giving out a Power Infusion to 4 different targets with all 5 of the different buffs. And because Clairvoyance will be different than the spell you used before Clairvoyance, it will benefit from being 30% stronger, which means you will be giving someone 15.6% haste plus 13% more damage for 10 seconds. Plus, why not some 30% more healing increased, as well as, why not, 7% of their mana back. That's what has gotten players to sort of question the choice of Blizzard to double down on the importance of Power Infusion. Now, this is now even stronger than the current Power Infusion. Don't get baited by players saying that, Power Infusion was a problem because it gave you haste, and haste was very polarizing because certain specs scaled a lot with haste. This is still stronger. Not only is it 1 minute shorter, the current buff is 20% haste for 15 seconds every 2 minutes. This one can be 15.6% haste for 10 seconds every minute or every other minute, because you have to alternate them. Either way, it is stronger, even if you just made it every minute. Except that then you also have Clairvoyance, which is going to cast 2 extra ones sometimes. And then you also have Grand Reveal, which is gonna give you 1 or 2 extra Power Infusions every fight because of the 150 stacks you're going to be reaching. So in the end, you will be netting out way more casts of PI and being in general more powerful. This is also very strong because with a 1 minute cooldown, you can now easily alternate this buff to the 2 minute cooldown specs and the 3 minute cooldown specs, as opposed to the current Power Infusion, which has a 2 minute cooldown. If in the raid, for example, you were tied to giving Power Infusion to your Unholy DK, you had to wait one more minute of having Power Infusion available because you were lining it up with a Unholy Death Knight. Now, this is not a problem. Now you can just give Premonition to a spec on his 2-minute cooldown, and then 1 minute later you can give it to the Unholy DK, and then 1 minute later you can give it back to the spec with the 2-minute cooldowns. So with this one, it's even easier to line up your powerful cooldown with another spec's powerful cooldowns. This, of course, has gotten players to complain also because now you are making this spec, the healer spec, in this case, even more focused around something that's not even for them, something that is empowering someone else. You're making them even more of a buff bot. And now what's worse is that at this point we have already seen the issues with the Paladin talent 3 of the Holy Armaments, together with, of course, the talent 3 of the Evoker, the one next to Augmentation for Preservation, and all of these will be some sort of buff bots. They will some sort of creation of extra damage increases, extra haste, extra buffs given to your raid, for example, or your party. This is something that Paladin will have available with Holy Armaments, something that Evoker will have available as Preservation, and now something that Priest will have available in the form of a updated Power Infusion. But for example, we just went through Druid, and Druid has nothing. None of this is buffing anyone outside of the Druid itself. So you would question, how is a Resto Druid going to be competing with a healer that can buff their party or the raid, with another healer that can buff their party or the raid, and another healer that can buff their party or the raid? You know, if you turn a bunch of healers into mini Augmentation Evokers and then you leave a couple of healers out of this gang, and you know, it feels like they will be left out. It feels like they will be ignored over picking up these healers with the ability to buff other players in their group. That seems to be the main worry after seeing Priest and having yet another toolkit based around buffs, around power-ups for the other players in your group. This is of course still not even the alpha of the game. We are in the pre-alpha version where these talents are being shown, so of course by the time we get to the release of the game, this will be barely even recognizable. We will get way more changes, fixes, nerfs, etc, that will hopefully make this more balanced. However, up to now, we have discovered some kind of trend of giving more utility buffs to a bunch of these hero talents, in particular the healer ones. So we will see how this progresses as we go deeper down the reveal of these hero talents. But for today, on this Thursday, we can call it quits for now. We are leaving each other, of course, by thanking all of the Patreon supporters, and as usual, everyone who is still doing it for free. Like, for example, liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, I don't know, I just hope this won't become even more of an awful thing to balance than Power Infusion already is. Please.